So here's us on the Raggedy Edge. Welcome to episode 6 of So Here's Us on the Raggedy Edge. My name's Matthew Broyles. With me, I have a very special guest, Miss Marci Marie. You might have seen her on our podcast, might have seen her coverage on the New York Times. There's various places where you might have seen her. But I'm going to let her sort of introduce herself and what it is that she does out in the world.
Thank you, Matthew. Thanks so much for that. My name is Marci Marie, and I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for Lioness Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. I am formerly incarcerated. I spent 10 years in a Texas women's prison. I have so many projects going on. You could add filmmaker. I'm in the middle of making a short film. I'm in the middle of recording a television show, and wow. I have a podcast, Very on the
nice.
Reckyard Women's Prison podcast.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that initially, that's the one I had listened to a few times, and it's very interesting kind of to have that perspective. And there was the piece in the Times that I saw was kind of like, it feels like there's a lot more call for this sort of knowledge that you're imparting to people. And so just kind of as a description, what do you guys talk about on that show?
Yeah, well, we talk about everything Texas women's prisons. We talk about the unique kind of disparities that women face that are incarcerated. Prisons, especially in the South, I think were built primarily for men, and the rules and regulations are geared towards men, and women kind of suffer from that. There's a lot of injustices as far as unequal education opportunities for people housed in women's prisons versus people housed in men's prisons. And before we move further, I'll say that when I'm talking about women's prisons, I'm talking about trans men that are housed in women's prisons as well. So we definitely advocate for that entire population. Yeah,
and that's an increasing issue as well. And It's one of those things that I guess I had not heard until there was a bit of coverage, because I'd seen all the coverage about kind of the heat in the prisons, because a lot of them are not even air conditioned, which kind of shocked me when I found that out. In Texas of all places, it kind of would remind me of stuff like Alcatraz, where people would freeze to death over there. It's like it feels deliberate to me. That kind of thing is going on. I don't know if that's your sense as well.
It absolutely is deliberate. We have a big chunk of prisons that were built in the 90s that were deliberately built without any climate control here in Texas. That's
outrageous to me, because it really does get to, I was talking to Tisa Leggett on a previous episode, and she does a lot with folks who are wrongly imprisoned and things, but it's that stigma that comes with, like, well, once you've been arrested and once you've been sentenced, people kind of put you in a different category in their head to regular people, and somehow it just like kind of, I don't know, it feels like you get moved into sort of a subhuman category, and I always thought that was strange, because the idea, I would think, with something like a penitentiary, that the name implies that it's going to help them get better. And of course it doesn't do that. Very much does the opposite a lot of the times. And I don't know if that was your sense of it as well, as like, you're not really being treated like a person with that type of arrangement.
for sure that there's a big stigma that happens when you get convicted of a crime, whether it was a heinous crime or a much lesser crime,
right.
And whether or not maybe you signed for time just to get on probation and get out of jail, because
right.
we have a lot of innocent folks that just sign for time, because they need to get home to their kids and jobs and mortgages and rent and all of these things. So for sure, you feel there is that feel. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I use my voice on social media, is so that people kind of see this this middle class white chick grew up in kind of a suburban neighborhood. And I don't look like somebody that often people, what it is often people will look at me and say, hey, you don't look like you've been to prison.
Right.
The fact is, the faces of mass incarceration are everywhere in this country, and we look like all sorts of people. I for sure am the minority. Obviously, marginalized communities are much more impacted by the justice system. In fact, the LGBT community is the fastest growing population inside of our prisons, the fastest getting arrested and growing. So for sure, they're targeting marginalized communities, but it's everybody. We all suffer.
Yeah, and it kind of it's been one of these things too, where from looking at things like, again, even if you were not wrongfully convicted, there is a bit in the Constitution about cruel and unusual punishment, and I think somehow we've gotten to the point where I remember, I'm old enough to remember when a lot of country songs were about like being in prison, right? And that those people who were singing those songs were thought of as like, kind of folk heroes in a certain way, like people like Merle Haggard and whatever. And I find that kind of attitude towards prisoners is just, a regular person who, made a mistake and paid for it. That seems to have been replaced with this kind of thing of like, no, this person is just, bad and irredeemable. And, I feel like that's, it's in line with sort of the turn towards people kind of with the Blue Lives Matter type of stuff. It's like, there's a very propaganda type of aspect to it, to me anyway. And I don't know if you have experienced that sort of like, you've talked about kind of the stigma that goes along with it. And also, like you said, when they look at you and they don't expect to see someone who's been to prison, right? There is an expectation, and I think that happens with people who aren't in prison, but who look like what people think you're supposed to look like when you're in. And so I think people will make that assumption and say, oh, well, this is, this guy probably has been in prison, even though he's a lawyer or whatever, like and that I think definitely influences juries probably, whether somebody looks the part or not. But I do think that with the increasing numbers of people doing that, what's the response been to your channel and to the sorts of things you've been doing? Kind of, I've seen kind of the how-tos, of how to make, what was it, the barbecue chicken out of, do you get mostly responses from people who have been to prison, or do you get responses from all over?
Yeah, it really depends on which channel you're watching. If you're watching me on Facebook, those are mostly folks that have done time, and they're watching me do prison recipes or talk about everything from, hey, y'all, I made fried pickles like this, and hey, y'all, this lady broke out into a seizure in the middle of the summer because it was 130 degrees in the cell, right?
Yeah.
And so on Facebook, it's like mostly folks that have been to prison. And on TikTok, I get a lot of family members, so I think it just kind of depends. YouTube, they're pretty vicious with me over on YouTube.
Yeah, well, you should never ever go into the YouTube comments section of anything ever. speak.
Right. They're hardcore.
Oh, people
was
are
featured on Inside Edition a couple weeks ago, and it was a great piece. Who would have known that Inside Edition would have told a story in such a non-extractive whole story, and just they knocked it out of the park. It was a great piece, and I go into the comment sections, and man, they were eating me alive. It really depends. I get a lot of support and a lot of love, but I get a lot of ugly comments too. That just comes with it.
Well, and that's the other part, I guess, is you do run the risk, having served the time already, and then you come out, and then there's almost sort of more punishment if you're going to speak out about this sort of thing, because it's we do have kind of an attitude in our heads is like, well, if you end up there, you deserve whatever happens, right? And whatever happens can just be anything, I guess. And I think, as usual, when it happens to somebody you start thinking differently about it, right? Or if it's about to happen to you, then suddenly it's an issue. And I think a lot of times we have the bifurcated thing where we think if there's, we have social strata where there's people on this level and people on that level. And I think the sorts of comments that I can only imagine what your inbox looks like.
Yes, it's wild. It really is. You have to have thick skin for sure. It's shocking to me. I will make a video about sexual assault in women's prisons that is very common. It's happening all the time. And I will get comments like, well, shouldn't have gone to prison. Like,
right. Yeah, that's the attitude.
Justifying these crimes, right. Justifying the crimes committed against the people incarcerated because they are incarcerated.
Well, and to the point where, certain political candidates will joke about it, I mean, it's kind of, it gets really disgusting like that.
Yeah, absolutely. This tough on crime kind of way of thinking, if you look at Texas Prison's mission statement, it talks about rehabilitation. It talks about bettering someone. And the fact is that it simply inflicts more trauma. It's really causes more harm and perpetuates the cycle of violence, quite frankly. So,
yeah. And so I know you work with a lot of women who have gotten out. And do you find that the reintegration into society it feels like that would almost be as hard as the prison itself in some ways, trying to kind of re-enter when you've got this big, mark on your head?
Reentry after prison, especially, it's hard if you've done 6 months, but especially for those that have done decades, it's really challenging. It's a really odd thing emotionally and mentally to go from a community, because we do build our own community inside of those prison walls, and leaving people that you have literally slept next to and worked with and wrecked with and watched TV with for years. And now you're just pulled from that environment, and then facing all of the emotional and mental struggles that come with family reunification. And if you were a parent, how are those relationships with your kids, and earning trust back? And then on top of that, there's this kind of mark on your back. So now you're having extra hard time with employment. You can't get a lease in your name. You can't get into certain schools. And so, it's really hugely challenging. And the way that I have seen work the best for helping that community is peer support. It's finding a community of other people that are going through the same thing or have been through it, kind of guiding you. I
feel like it's a similar principle. I've worked with veterans who are kind of trying to do the same thing, coming back from a war situation and trying to integrate into society. You kind of have to talk to people who know what you're talking about, because if you talk to someone who doesn't have that experience, they're talking from another planet. And so, building those networks of people who just know what you mean when you are talking about this stuff, I think that's a good thing to do. I think it's also when you, so I know you're kind of in multiple organizations. So is that what Lioness is doing, or is that?
Yeah, well, Lioness is an organization that, our mission statement says we aim to end the devaluing of women, girls, and gender expansive individuals in the Texas criminal legal system and eventually end the entire incarceration. It's an abolitionist organization. And so we do a lot of legislative work. We do a lot of leadership training, trauma-informed training. We have peer support specialists. And so that's, it's a broad.
Yeah.
It's such a our hands are in a lot of different jars.
Yeah. So if somebody were to get out of prison, let's say, do you have a way of finding them, or do they need to find you? Is it?
So we have inside members. Now there's 9,000 women incarcerated in Texas prisons. We have about 500 members on the inside that we communicate with. So then when they get out, then we're there as a support network.
Okay,
we're there as a resource hub. We have a lot of vetted resources. So if someone gets out and says, hey, I'm in Austin and I need an apartment, we already know where the background friendly locations are. And, we kind of have the emergency hookups for things. But if you haven't connected with us while you're incarcerated, you would need to connect with us post-incarceration.
Right.
And the main thing is, if you want to get involved in making a change, we're really building leaders. We're teaching people how to use their own story for change, to talk to their lawmakers and policymakers. And we have resources for furthering your education, really trying to get folks settled and grounded and give them the community support that they need. Now,
Texas being Texas, have you had any sort of positive interactions with the government with this? I mean, because it feels like the sort of thing they wouldn't be for. But
they don't love us, Matthew. They don't love us. In fact, we have a federal lawsuit against the Texas prison system right now because they are knowingly housing incarcerated people in dangerous temperatures. Yeah. People are dying. So we have this active lawsuit. And then, of course, I'm all over social media on my personal platforms, just giving them the business all the time. And so, no, we're not really on great terms with them. I will say, though, we did get a piece of legislation passed last session, and it was regarding women's transport to medical. That bus is just a nightmare, and we've all lived it. It's really the indignities that women face going to medical transport, being on a bus for 10 hours handcuffed with this open restroom. Like, it's just absurd. And we did get legislation passed. And so that was really exciting. And,
that's good.
So now I have very high expectations. That was my first session out of prison. And now we have this new session. It kind of set the bar pretty high. I've been told that isn't the norm, but
I'm sure that's true. I mean, knowing enough people who try to lobby for things with our legislature, it's a tough job to do that. I think, though, so you're primarily working with and in Texas. I know this problem probably exists in other states.
Yeah, absolutely. It exists nationwide, throughout the country. Texas is big enough, and it's about all we can handle at this point.
Oh, yeah,
maybe at some point we can expand. I'm a part of a couple of other organizations that work on a national level. I do work with Ban the Box Initiative. They do trying to end solitary confinement. So I work with them a little bit. I work with Represent Justice, which is a narrative building. They're co-producing my film, actually, and they're a national org. But as far as Linus goes, it's really statewide.
So this film you're talking about, is this something you're at liberty to discuss, or are you having to?
I am.
Okay, good.
I am, and I would love to. We expect for it to be out to premiere in October of 2025, and I interviewed 20 women that had babies while they were incarcerated inside of Texas prisons, and so it's a collective story. It's a narrative. It's not a documentary style. So I think it really has kind of an entertaining value, but it's going to tell a collective story of what exactly that looks like for a pregnant woman to go through her pregnancy and delivery inside of a Texas prison where it's still legal to be handcuffed and even shackled during delivery.
Yeah. It is, again, it's one of those things where I think most people probably don't think about it as much because it's not something that enters their lives. And when they do start thinking about it, and they start hearing, I know certainly for me, when you start hearing about the way it's actually run, it really feels like it just comes out of another era. Like it feels like it's, the 1800s or something. But then again, Texas is like that in a lot of ways. So I don't know why.
I love that you said that because, I remember being incarcerated during my incarceration thinking, man, this feels like even just racial injustices that were going on around me, the way that the LGBT community was spoke to and the way that trans men were talked down on. I just really felt like I had stepped back in time just about like 40 years. So I think it's really interesting that you brought that up.
Well, I think it's been on my mind lately because it feels like that's sort of what we're also trying to do, nationwide right now is to wind back some clocks. And, the trans community is one that I'm, very connected with. And I know a lot of those folks are just completely terrified, about what's going to go on going forward. And, it's bad enough just to exist, as a trans person, but then to enter prison that way is because of course, and I'm assuming that you're not incarcerated based on that you would be incarcerated based on birth gender. I would guess.
Yeah, in Texas, they house you according to the gender that you were assigned at birth, and so in men's prisons, trans women are housed separately, so they are in their own housing, and I'm sure that's for their protection. Right. For in women's prisons, our trans men were right there with us, and I get a lot of questions on my social media that are like, "Weren't you scared to be with that trans man, or did the trans men were they attacking? Were they assaulting people?" No, they weren't.
That's
ridiculous. No, I never, not one instant, not one in 10 years was I ever fearful or saw anybody or even heard of a trans man assaulting one of the other incarcerated folks.
Well,
what did happen is men, staff.
Yes.
That's who we were afraid of because that's where the aggression and certainly the sexual harassment and assaults were coming from.
Well, and that's to those folks who always say things like that, I think they're telling me that they don't have any trans friends without telling me they don't have any trans friends. Like, this idea that you're going to be more afraid. I would be much more afraid to leave my child with a priest than I would with a trans person because
all day, every day. Yeah.
Because if you're talking about the record, or certainly with a prison guard, that's first of all, the power imbalance, is wrong there, but also my friends in the trans community are about the least frightening people that you would ever meet. They don't go around terrorizing the place.
And that's not just opinions. That's statistically speaking, right? It's just this propaganda and this fear mongering that's been going on in social media and even widespread media sometimes. That gets people all confused.
Yeah, it does, and I think too. I don't know if you've had this kind of a thing where when you think of crime, most people tend to think men, right? And then there's statistical reasons for that. Most crimes are committed by men. And is it a thing where people kind of look odd at you, like, are you sure? I mean, because you don't fit the profile.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, and I because of that kind of thing in people's subconscious where they identify as someone that committed a crime as being a man. I think that women experience a lot more emotional abuse being incarcerated and post-incarceration. We were told things like, if you loved your kids, you wouldn't be in prison.
Right.
Or getting stripped out. I've been just completely naked in front of an officer on my way to visitation where my kids are on the other side of this door. So I know I can't say anything that would jeopardize this visit. And the guard just telling me what a horrible mother. You're a horrible mother. I can't believe you make your kids come up here and see you. I can't believe you've done this. And I've never heard a formerly incarcerated man say that was his experience when his family visited him in prison.
No, I can imagine that it is. Yeah, I mean, because the expectation, the expectations for dads is always different than for moms anyway. But that used to irk me in the other direction, because I would go to meetups with my kiddo and people would look at me weird because I was the only dad there, and it's like, isn't mom supposed to be here? It's like, well, mom's working.
Right.
But But I think there is a sense in which when you don't conform to expectations just generally, and certainly in Texas, there's already kind of a backlash built into that of, well, you're not being who in my mind you're supposed to be, and so I'm going to judge you for that. Whether or not it's has to do with the justice system or not. But if you add to that an official condemnation, I have to think that that's probably a lot more. I would imagine it's harder to have in your head and to try to have a counter narrative in your head for what all these people are telling you.
Right. Once you get convicted of a crime, you are judged by your worst action every day for the rest of your life. By some people just never get past that. They don't have the wherewithal to see past that. And the fact is that people that, whether you have committed a crime like myself, I committed a crime. I got sentenced to 20 years. I did 10. I did my time. I'm still doing it on parole. And whether you were like me and committed a crime, or whether you were someone in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, or, whatever, Texas law of parties, you don't even have to commit the crime to be convicted. You just have to be there, or you signed for your time. Regardless, once you have that jacket, you are forever judged by that action. And it's really hard to shake that. And I think there's really something to be said for this expectation that we have for people. Like, we want people to get out of prison and do great and get a job and have the skills that they need. But we're housing them like animals and treating them like animals on the inside. We're not giving them an environment that's that hosts an area for you to be able to grow and heal and learn. And then we're putting them out here in the free world, and we're constantly closing doors in their face. And, I think that's one of the reasons I tell my story so openly, and it's whatever. It happened. I committed a crime. I got sentenced to prison. I did my time, but now I'm doing this. Two things can be true at once. Yeah. And I am not my worst mistake.
And that's the other thing, is that, the people contain multitudes, right? And so all of us have done very, very good things and done very, very bad things. And you would try, I would think, to take the sum of the person, when thinking about them. But I do think we tend to focus more on the negative. It's like, there's a YouTuber that I watch that every time I post one of their videos, somebody's like, oh, well, that guy, he's an ex-con, you know. I'm like, well, yeah, but he did the time and came out, and it's like, well, no, that's you know, that's it. That's, you know, you don't get to talk to me after that. And having had friends who have spent time, you know, behind bars and come out, that's a difficult attitude to get around, because I think you want to think of yourself as being a whole person, not just defined by that one thing, you know.
For sure. And then your confidence level is already,
of course,
been drugged through the dirt during incarceration, and then you come out and you're trying to build your life, and you don't even sometimes have the emotional wherewithal to do the things that need to be done because your confidence is so low. And when you just keep knocking down, I mean, you tell someone that they're not worthy enough times, they're going to start believing it, and they're going to start acting like it. And that's one of the reasons our recidivism rate is so high. Right.
And I've been hearing a lot about the for-profit prison situation, and I don't know if your experience was in a state or was in a privately owned or a public facility.
Yeah, so nationwide, about 30% of prisons are for-profit. And I'll say that term lightly because all prisons are about making money, whether they're state-ran or individual corporations. In Texas, only about 8% are.
Okay.
And in Texas, the prisons that are privately ran are favored over the state-ran states. So, I mean, they're nicer, they eat better, they have air conditioning, and the state prisons are worse. Their employees are a little bit more secure, working for those private than our state employees, unfortunately. So the staff is nicer.
And what drives that? Like, you know, who gets sent where? Is that based on the jurisdictions or?
Yeah. It's really wild. In Texas, there's 14 prisons that house women. 3 of those prisons are maximum security units. So if you have certain charges, you have to go to one of those 3. But if you have a charge like mine, it was a white collar charge, I could have been housed anywhere. And it's really just completely random. So it's kind of just the luck of the draw of where you go. And I went to a rough one. I went to a maximum security prison. I was on the Dr. Lane Murray unit in Gatesville, and it's one of the rougher ones. So,
yeah, and just the luck of the draw, I guess. You know how that goes down. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember being on. There's like a transport bus when you go from your intake unit. You're on this transport bus, and we all know which prison we're going to, and it's like this bus that goes through the whole state. It's this 2-day bus ride, and everybody's like the old schools that know about the prisons are telling us like, oh, you're good. Oh, you're going to Mountain View. You're great. Oh, you're going to Lane Murray. Well, you need to watch for this. You need to watch for that. You don't need to get caught off camera with an officer, like, you know, just really preparing you.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, again, you would think there would be some sort of uniformity with that, but I know that there isn't. Well, certainly even with local jails, you know, I mean, there's a lot of variety as far as, you know, how bad it is. I think too, with Texas, I guess particularly Texas is the thing that I've got the most experience with. There's an equivalence between being tough on crime and locking more people up. Which to me, I don't know that math is mathing that much, because it would seem like there's other things that you could do besides just sweep a whole bunch more people up and chuck them in the joint, you know.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, Matthew. I mean, it's just really this idea that locking someone in a cage and not giving them any tools to learn, grow, heal, and keeping them away from their family, and then doing things like charging these crazy amounts for phone calls and visits. And then Texas is a massive state. You might be housed 8 hours away from your family,
Right.
so you're not going to see them. I mean, and then expect this person to come out better than when they went in, just based on those things. And then when you get to living conditions, it's a whole nother thing. But what if, we did things like stop locking up 10-year-olds, because 10-year-olds can go to prison in Texas, and they do.
Yeah, they do.
What if we start, I don't know, putting some resources into community and finding out what exactly was going on with the 13-year-old that threw a shoe at a police officer and got locked up for 4 years. Like, this is the kind of things we're doing in this state, and it's counterproductive to making our communities safer. It's not making anything safer.
And of course, a lot of why that doesn't get looked at is because when you look at the demographics of which 10-year-olds are getting locked up, they're definitely there are some through lines with that. And that has to do with how certain populations are seen at all. It's kind of a thing that is difficult sometimes to discuss with people because of either they've had experiences where they were too close to it, had a family member or somebody was in there, or they don't even want to think about that could happen to them, or that could happen to someone that they care about. And I have, friends and family members who have come within just like a hair, of that. And it just really plunges you into an entirely different world. But it should alarm the rest of us that world exists, though, in the way that it does, with that kind of real medieval kind of brutality that happens in there. But we don't want to, I feel like as a society, we don't want to think about that. And that bothers me,
Yeah, it's easier. It's easier for us not to think about the tough stuff. It's easier for us not to admit that we live in this society. And in Texas, we live in a state where there are countries that won't extradite people incarcerated here. Like, they won't, because of our living conditions, and mainly because of the climates in the summer. Like, we are the bad place. And that's really scary to think about, that we're supposed to be this hugely advanced society and, a great country and all of this. And we're housing humans in this way. It's absurd.
And it feels like, it almost feels like that's part of the threat, right? It's like, well, you live in this nice society right now, but if you do the wrong thing, then you just get plunged into this complete hell world, where that doesn't bear any resemblance at all to the world you came from. And I think some people think of that as a motivating factor. But of course, like you said, sometimes you're just in the wrong place, the wrong time, and sometimes stuff just happens, or you're not even the person at all, and you get thrown into it. And even when you get out, because they've exonerated some folks who've come out, but then you still have to deal with all of that stigma, even when you didn't do anything. And I think we just have this backwards notion of, what. I don't know. Do you actually think that, like, the people who are running this thing, do they really think that it's gonna make you better, or are they just saying that?
You're asking me a real big question, and I'm going to say something that sounds a little controversial. I don't know how your audience will take it, but I think that prisons were built and made to keep marginalized communities oppressed. Yeah. And I think they are doing exactly what they were made to do.
Right.
And there's kind of under this guise of helping people and rehabilitating people. But in fact, that's just not when the prison industrial complex was born. It was when the 13th Amendment happened and it abolished slavery. And then it said, well, you can still be a slave if you committed a crime.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, all of these laws were made slaves were freed. And then all of these laws were written to incarcerate the very people that they freed. And I think that was a catalyst. And I think we have not moved very far from that notion.
Yeah, and it's well, that's one of those things that will get me. I mean, I get branded as woke anyway, but I think that any objective study of history in the South certainly kind of leaves that as an inescapable conclusion. If we're being honest about it. But we're not good at. I feel like sometimes Texans are sort of the Baptists at the church who don't recognize each other at the bar on Saturday. I think there's a lot of things that we see each other doing that we know are wrong, but we're not going to be the ones to snitch on them. And also because we don't want people reporting that we're doing that stuff too. But I think that I don't know. It's hard to know. Do you ever have a sense? How do you maintain hope with this sort of thing? Like that things can improve.
I think maintaining hope comes from the way that I personally witnessed humanity survive and grow, even in that very oppressive environment. We still built bonds and friendships. And there were moments, Matthew, all of these horrible things we're talking about, the prison system, but there were moments in there where I experienced joy, where I was at peace, where I was felt loved and loved in there. And I think that really is what gives me hope, is that the root of all of it, we're all still human, and that humanity, it thrives. It really does.
Yeah, that's good I feel like that's the thing, that I struggle with a lot, is just sort of, where's the hope? Because there's all kinds of forces that seem to be pulling us into the abyss. But like you said, you also have people who are doing amazing things and people who come out of those bad situations. I don't like the aphorism that, you have to have suffering in order to build good character, right? I think there's limits to that. I think sometimes there's suffering that does not build good character at all, and in fact makes bad character. But I also think that there are people who can find strength in adversity and come out of it. And because you could have come out of the situation, a lot different than you did, I mean, and I'm sure there's people who come out and they just can't, find the hope.
Well, sure, for sure. I came home, though, to a very privileged life with a very supportive family, and families that owned homes. I knew I wasn't going to be on the streets, and families that had vehicles to get me to parole. And that certainly isn't the case for most people coming out of prison. Right.
And that's the other thing is well, and of course that also affects who goes in a lot of the times, is the people who don't have the resources. And there is a sense, I feel like, that, I don't know, it feels like the stratification, I mean, this is probably a bigger topic than we're even on here, but it feels like the way that we're trying to enforce social roles, and economic roles is intensifying right now. We're like, no, stay in your place, and prison is one of the tools that gets used for that. If somebody starts getting too uppity, that'll knock them down a few pegs. And
absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're made to separate us. They're designed to keep us separate.
Yeah, all right. I mean, an actual physical separation. Yeah. So that's. It's one of those things where I'm glad that there are people like you that are at least calling attention to it and that are trying to find a resource. That's, to me, is the most important part, is that the people who are coming out actually have somewhere to go to find out about that stuff. Because I have to think there's a lot of them that just think, well, this is it. I mean, I may not make it out of here. And by here, I mean on the outside,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's stressful. Life is stressful for people that haven't been incarcerated. And then when you have that kind of trauma history of going through incarceration and then have an X on your back on top of that, and then that you have major imposter syndrome as getting out
Sure.
of prison. It's highly stressful. So it's really important for community.
One of the interesting things that I've seen some of your videos where you kind of talk about things that you do while you're incarcerated that to sort of, like, let's say, making meals or coming up with uses for things that are not the intended use for them. That kind of almost is by itself a testament to the ingenuity of the people who are in there, that they're not just going to take what's given them, they're going to make something else out of it. To me.
Yeah, for certain. And you really see so many talents in there, and people really getting creative with how to get things done and how to make things more survivable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really impressive.
Well, because, currency is not really the same there as it is out here. Resources are defined as different things. And, I would imagine that there's almost kind of a market in and of itself of things that are useful in there that wouldn't be useful out here.
Yeah, for certain. They make all kinds of things in there that out here would be nothing. The showers in there, to be able to rinse long hair, you would need a shower head, and that's made. That's not something that, that's made out of a toothpaste holder or a toothpaste container. And that's just a small example. But yeah, there's a whole different market. There's a whole different currency. Yeah, it's a world within this outside world, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know if there are, was there anybody doing anything similar to what you're doing at the time, before you got out, when you kind of thought, maybe I can kind of do something like what they're doing?
Yeah, while I was incarcerated, I didn't know that there were folks out here that were working on systemic changes within our criminal legal system. I really felt like the outside world felt like I deserved to be in there, and I deserved what was happening. I didn't share a lot of the real raw things that were happening in there with my family, because I wanted to keep them okay and safe and not worrying about me. I remember when I made parole, my mom said, well, what are you going to do? What are you thinking about doing when you come home? And we were at a prison visit, and I said, I don't know, Mom, but I know that I have to help these folks in here, and I didn't know what that was going to look like. So I get out, and I start sharing my story a little bit on social media. I see some other folks sharing their stories. And then I get connected with Carrie Blakinger. She's a reporter with the LA Times now, but then she was reporting on Texas prisons with the Marshall Project. And she connected me with some advocacy groups. And I realized this was what I was meant to do.
Yeah. And I think the fact that there are other people out there doing it, I think, just points to the fact that it's definitely something that needs to be done, because it's not a small problem. It's a very large problem.
No, and it's a movement. I'm really thoroughly impressed at the amount of people that are coming out of prison and saying, you know what, this isn't right. Like the way that we're housing people, it's not working.
Right.
It's not lowering crime. It's and B, it's inhumane. Mm-hmm. So we need to shake things up, and there's a whole army of us out here.
Well, that in and of itself is reason for hope, I think. So if people wanted to find you on the worldwide interwebs, where would they go?
So I have a website. It's www.marcimarie, MarciMarie.com. And that has all my links. And that's my website name, but it just goes to my link tree. It's not that fancy, y'all. So it'll go to all my socials.
Okay, good. And that's got the links to Lioness and all that.
It does. It absolutely does. If you want to get involved, that's a place to go. So
this project that you're working on, the film, is that being done by a studio or by a network or?
So the film that I'm working on is co-produced by Represent Justice, and it's all grassroots.
Okay.
I have a grant, and we're making it happen.
Okay.
I have another project that I can't go into a whole lot of detail about the show itself, but it has been looked at by the Food Network, so that probably gives you a hint. And TLC, we've gotten offers from both of those places, so I'm excited for that. And I don't know. These things take longer than I.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. Yeah,
I want to say like it'll be out this time, but I don't know. We just have been working on it for about 8 months, and it's still. Like we have offers. I don't know how it just seems like it takes forever.
I feel like film is worse. The music is bad enough. I mean, like by the time you write the stuff, make the record, get through all the production and release and all that, like it takes longer than you think it's going to. Film, the people that I know that do film, I mean, you can have an idea and it'll be forever, between when it gets conceived of and when it gets shot and when it actually, finds its way out into the world. But I would imagine that once you do have one of those two things or anything out, you'll be posting it on your link tree. So
absolutely I will. Yeah, y'all stay tuned.
Yeah, I appreciate you spending time with us today, and I hope that folks look up what you're doing, and I hope that things are well with you as they can be. And
I appreciate you for having me. Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
And say hi to your parents for me.
Absolutely, I will.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
This program is brought to you by Naive Media. Visit thematthewshow.com for info on this and other programs.